This is the Alternative Leader Podcast with Mary Williams, inspiring the leaders of today, getting to the grit and discovering the gold with powerful insights and learnings, helping us to lead with strength, determination, and compassion.
Welcome to the Alternative Leader Podcast. I'm Mary Williams, the Mind Architect, and I'm your host. Today I'm going to be speaking to Haque. Mo is a keynote speaker on empowerment and inclusion. He's also the author of Choosing to Stay, How Cancer Gave Me My Life Back, and he now uses his incredible story to make a positive difference in the world. And we're going to speak to Mo because he's got a fascinating story about how he's come through his cancer journey. So Mo, where would you like to start telling your story?
It's great to be on your show. We go back 5.5 years now, 2014, December, when the doctor said it's cancer and that I had a small chance of success. And that is where the cancer journey begins, when I was totally shattered. I was 31 years of age and my life just instantly changed from waking up in the morning, getting ready and going to work. It was now waking up and home and hospital and going to bed. It was a case of, will I wake up in the morning?
Right.
And that was the very start of it.
Can I ask what the signs were? What led you to even get tested?
So it's a great question. Now, looking back in hindsight, there was a lot of stomach upset. So I'd be in meetings at work when I'd have stomach ache and I'd have to get up and walk around or go to the toilet. The stool or my poo was loose. It was inconsistent. And I really didn't know what was causing that. But those symptoms would come and go. But it was when that pain just was there constantly. I was coming home from work one evening where I developed a pain in the left abdomen. And then that pain just grew and grew and grew. When I went to bed, I wasn't sure if I'd wake up. It was that bad. And so when I did wake up, the first thing I did was walk to A&E. The hospital is like a 5-minute walk.
Right.
And at A&E, the doctor asked for my family history. And my dad had died from bowel cancer when I was a baby.
Right.
And so he was like, okay, we need to put cameras inside to find out what's going on. They already checked my bloods and they found me to be anemic. And he said, for a guy my age, that was unusual. And it took 6 weeks to have the cameras put inside, a colonoscopy and an endoscopy. In that time, we had more blood tests, more x-rays, ultrasounds, but nothing really came back. And it was at the colonoscopy stage where they found an inflammation that was too large. They put me in for a CT scan straight away. And 6 days later, it came back with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. Now, in the cancer world, stage 1 is an early stage condition where options are high and survival chances are a lot greater. Stage 4, your options are limited and survival decreases. And so when the doctor said you have a small chance of success, it kind of instantly highlighted how severe my condition was. I didn't know anything about cancer at that stage, but now I know a lot more, where I am sharing my story in medical groups, in advisory boards, on stages, in health conferences, doctors and nurses even. And yeah, so the signs were there, but I didn't know what they were. And now it's a case of sharing those signs as much as possible to stop others from developing cancers in the first place.
And you have a fascinating story about actually how you ended up getting the treatment that's worked for you, don't you?
Yeah.
You had a conventional you went the conventional route, and then it changed. So tell us a bit more about what happened there.
Yeah. So I had a year of standard NHS treatment, which included 18 cycles of chemotherapy, included a major operation, removed my colon, part of my stomach. I've been given an ileostomy, which I didn't know what that was, but it's a pouch that collects my poo, basically. So I don't go to the toilet the way I used to. It comes out in my bag and I have to change the bag every day. I need to really empty it out. And so that procedure was life-saving.
Right.
And this week, in fact, someone in the UK refused to have that surgery, and he was given the right to refuse that surgery because he didn't want to live with a stoma, and he's now died. And so the messaging is clear, like stomas can save lives, and it's destigmatizing that message. Unfortunately for me, my cancer kept growing. It moved into the lymph nodes, and then I had a different type of chemo, and that didn't work either. And so the doctor said they'd run out of treatment options. Now, because my dad died of bowel cancer relatively young, and me being diagnosed relatively young, there was a genetic condition that they wanted me to be tested for called Lynch syndrome. And I was tested for it and found to be positive. Now, someone who has Lynch syndrome has a high risk of developing bowel cancer. Women with Lynch syndrome have additional risks of gynecological cancers.
Right.
Now, if you know you have Lynch, you can be put on surveillance programs. Aspirin has been shown to reduce developing cancers.
Right.
But if you don't know, then it's kind of like there's something inside of you that is putting you at high risk. But researchers showed a drug called immunotherapy works really well with Lynch syndrome cancers. And my doctors were desperate to get me on it. The only problem was it wasn't on the NHS. So we put in an application for funding. 3 months later, they said no. We were looking for clinical trials. We were hopeful of some opening up, but they were delayed. And the ones which were opening up were only taking new patients. And because I'd already received 2 lines of chemo, I was excluded. We applied to the drug companies for compassionate use, but they too were like, no, it's available on the market. If you want it, pay for it. So when I asked my doctors how much it would cost, they said you needed to be a millionaire. And so we were looking for other ways to gain access. So we got in touch with doctors in America, doctors in India, in Europe, but every avenue was a no. We looked for a political route. So my MP, Keir Starmer, who at the time was 1 year into being an MP. I didn't know who he was. I kind of ambushed him at a Meet Your MP event, and he took on my case straight away, and him and his team represented me to the Department of Health, Jeremy Hunt's office, and he didn't want to know. They came back and said it's a decision for the NHS. And so I exhausted all those routes, and a friend of mine said, let's fundraise. And I was in no position to fundraise because, I mean, I was okay asking for help because I could not have done the cancer up until that point, 1.5 years on my own. I needed help with shopping, with transport, with cleaning, with all sorts of stuff. But when it came to money, there was no way I was going to ask for help. But
Can I just ask why? What was the money issue?
when I look back, I was going to bed crying, asking, am I worthy? And what is the price on life? Am I deserving? And I've got an amazing network of friends, supportive network who are trained in therapy and psychology and emotional work, where I was exploring these questions. And the moment I realized I am worthy, I am deserving, I went back to my friend and said, let's fundraise. And that was the start of the next phase.
Just before you go into that, if it's all right with you, I just kind of pause and ask a question there. What was the tipping point for you to realize, to go from am I worthy to I am worthy? Because I know with my clients that is often the key issue that they have, however their problems are showing. It's am I worthy or am I not worthy? So what for you is the tipping point to say, well, yes, I am?
Yeah, so it actually also goes back to the original diagnosis, where 2 of the questions right from the start was, what does this mean? And will I choose to stay? So it became my search for meaning. So throughout all the lows of the treatment, because the side effects were horrible, were brutal. And so throughout all of that, it was, what does this mean? And exploring the meaning of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, there was a question of, will I choose to stay? So everything I did was, it was about my choice, how I choose to approach the condition, how I choose to take the doctor's words. Like, there was a sense of empowerment in that process. Now, when it came to deciding to fundraise, I had reached the lowest of the low, where I was in a depressive state, where I'd be at home rooted on my sofa. I wouldn't shave, I wouldn't shower. I was, I had people visit me as if I was dying, and medically I was. And I got a notification on my phone. I had a calendar invite with a friend, Roberta, who was over from Brazil, and that was in the diary months before. And I remember thinking, at this point, I'd cancelled so many appointments with friends. And I remember a voice inside of me said, if I cancel on Roberta, I may never see her again. And it was with that, I had a shave, I had a shower, I got changed, and I went out and I met up with her. And we go back at this point, probably 10 years. We both were elected as student leaders at our university. She was the president, I was vice president. And we had another colleague, David, and she was in Brazil, I was in London, and David was in Dubai. He resettled over there. And so I was meeting with Roberta, and out of the blue, David had come and surprised me in joining us. And it was in that moment, it was a case of, wow, there's so much love around. And the next day, my former gym instructor invited me for pizza. And he said, do you want to step into my gym, or the gym? Because one of the saddest days was canceling my gym membership. I was a fitness person, and not being able to go to the gym hurt. And so when I walked in and the music was on and seeing the machines, it was a case of, Ali, I'm going to step onto one of these treadmills one of these days. And those interactions, coupled with doing the inventory of my life, where as a kid, I was always about helping people. I would be at home at 9 o'clock and one of my neighbors in my block would ring and say, look, the gas isn't working. Can you come? And I'd go and, like, as a child, I would set the boiler, the, like, little things like that, or their computer would stop working and I would go and fix it. And this was like on a community level. I'd given back all through my life and through my work. And it was a case of, this was my time. And, I am worthy, I am deserving. And so it was, it's a long way round of answering your question. It was a combination of things that were happening in my external world, but also an inventory of looking back. And, I have given unconditionally. And so this was a chance for others to give back. And it wasn't a known that we will raise the money, because at this point we were clearer in knowing how much. And it was a case of £200,000.
A lot of money.
And, like, the spectrum was, we'll raise a small amount because I knew my friends and my family would donate. Or it was a case of someone incredibly wealthy will come in and say, here's the money, here's a treatment. Like, that was the spectrum, but it was going to be me choosing to stay and doing what I could do. There was no guarantees. I had some people say, Mo, there's a chance you're not going to make it. Are you prepared? And so it was hearing those voices at the same time, but it was a case of, I'm going to do whatever I can once we made the decision. And then that's what we did.
It's a lovely phrase, choosing to stay. And you mentioned that was asked at the beginning. Was that something the medical professionals asked you? Or was that something you asked yourself?
So it goes back a few years earlier, maybe 2.5 years earlier. I remember it was 2012. I went to see Gabrielle Bernstein. She's a spiritual speaker, author. And I went to hear her speak and give a lecture, and someone in the audience asked why their mother died of cancer. They'd gone to see a spiritual healer who was famous for healing people, and why it didn't work. And Gabrielle's answer was a question in terms of, did your mum want to stay? Did your mum want to be alive? And the daughter instantly said no, she'd had enough. And so for some reason, that interaction stayed with me in my consciousness. And so at the point of diagnosis, I remember that interaction. It was a case of, am I going to choose to stay? And so, yeah, that's where it came. And it was a driving question.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how these things sort of stick in our head and become hugely influential on. And so you did go on to fundraise, and you did raise enough money. So tell me about the new treatment and how that's affected you.
So, incredibly, we started raising the money, and within month 1, we'd raised enough to start the treatment. So when we started the treatment, I say we because it was a collective effort. My doctors, my family, my friends, complete strangers who I still don't know, are all part of my story. And after 4 cycles, 3 months in, the scans came back incredibly positive, where the tumors, some of them reduced by 70%, some of them by 30%, 40%. It was just what the research was showing. A Lynch syndrome patient responding really well to immunotherapy. The difference being chemotherapy is like poison being injected into your bloodstream, targeting the bad cells, whereas immunotherapy is made up of antibodies and antigens, which help trigger the immune system to take care of the cancer. It's a different philosophy, different methodology altogether. And it's still new in the medical world. They started developing this drug in 2007-8, and in the medical world, 10 years is nothing, because they need to get license and trials and authorization. But because the success of this drug for certain types of cancer is so incredible, it's called the president's drug because President Jimmy Carter was given this drug, and it's famous for him surviving his cancer. Here is an elderly person with a horrific cancer surviving. And so the drug did what it said, and I had 1 year of this treatment, and the tumors reduced to millimeters. And so my doctor took me off the medication and said, let's monitor you. And that was 3 years ago. And I had a scan now. What are we in June 2020? We stopped the medication in May 2017. And 3 years on, there's no evidence of disease. And so going back,
of cancer at all now.
Yeah, going back 5.5 years ago, a stage 4 cancer, being told you have a small chance of success, to where I am right now, it's a miracle, considering everything that we've had to go through to get the drug. And so, yeah, I'm very, very lucky and blessed and grateful.
That's incredible.
To be here having this story, having this conversation. Yeah, it is incredible.
Yeah. How has it changed your life?
Health has become a huge factor. Now, there are side effects of this drug, which I live with and contend with every day. They're different from the chemotherapy side effects. So the chemo side effects were sickness, diarrhea, fatigue, weight loss, loss of taste. And when you take one and compound them with everything else, I had a blood clot in my lungs thrown into the mix. It's horrific. The side effects of the immunotherapy are more autoimmune based. So arthritis, I had heard of arthritis before, but I didn't know how bad it was or how bad it can be. I'll be out where my knees would just lock up and I can't walk.
Right.
And I can't flex the knees. And so I'm walking like a zombie. Or I can't, my hands will stiffen up. And so if someone shakes my hand, it would make me scream and someone will get offended. Like, what have I done? And I've also experienced ulcerative colitis, which is an inflammation of the rectum, and that causes different symptoms for different people. But putting those health issues aside, I've been able to go on and write a book, which you put in the introduction, Choosing to Stay. I've traveled different parts of the world, like recently, the last 6 months is a bit of a bubble with the coronavirus, but just before I'd been invited to Houston, Texas to share my story at a Lynch syndrome event, been invited to Ireland, personal development event. I sit on a number of boards from a medical perspective to try and influence change, submitting petitions at number 10 Downing Street last year with Bowel Cancer UK. There were like 5 people allowed through, and I was asked to be one of those. And so being given these extremely privileged opportunities to try to make change. And one thing I've learned is that it takes time, and time that us cancer patients don't have.
Yeah.
And so it's tough because I've made a number of friends in the cancer world who have gone on and died. And so there's not a week that goes by, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, or even in the media, that you hear of someone who's died. And recently, George Alagaya, BBC News presenter, he's been going through bowel cancer for a number of years, and his has progressed into his lungs. And so it kind of like shrinks the world. Everyone who's going through cancer is part of the family, and we fight. And so my life has changed completely as a result. Previously, I was student development director at Kingston University, and one of the projects I was working on was equality and diversity and making it student-led. So students who face discrimination on campus to solve those problems. And I was so passionate about it that it got kind of derailed by the cancer and the events of the last 2-3 weeks with George Floyd's murder and the protests that have followed kind of relit that fire within. And I'm revisiting a lot of the material I missed because of the cancer. And so it's a case of, how do I now, kind of use my voice again to a cause that I have an affinity to.
There's a wonderful story of community, isn't there? Community and care all the way through, that right from being, a young boy, you were very involved in your community, just very naturally helping others and sort of, going out and helping people light their boilers and things. And then through that the aspect of the cancer, you've managed it as a community of doctors and friends, and then reached out to a wider community of people, as you said, asking for fundraising from people who will never know you or meet you, and then taking that sense of community onwards in looking at the diversity and inclusion again. So there's a kind of a wonderful sense of sort of love and affection almost that comes through when you speak. Is that something that you really feel now?
Yeah, I mean, some of the fundraising stories are just incredible and completely on various different levels. And so one morning I woke up to a Facebook message, and they were friends of friends of friends of friends. I think it was 5 or 6 steps connected, and I don't think they even know who was connected to me. But it was Alex and Stephanie, a couple who were traveling in New Zealand. they heard my story, and they'd had a lot of love given their way while traveling through Asia and Australia, where they wanted to give back. And so they decided to do a cycle trek from the south to the north of New Zealand in a 50-day period. And I'm receiving this message saying, why would you do that? And they ended up raising almost £5,000, which completely blew me away. And I was following their story, and I was kind of scared for them because they weren't trained cyclists, definitely hardly ever cycled. And here they were, just on this campaign, and they're now back in the UK, and I have met up with them a couple of times, and it's surreal. Yet closer to home, my local pharmacy were holding a collection for me on their counter. They had a little poster and a collection pot. And one day I walked in, and the pharmacist, Nikita, said, "Mo, you're not going to believe this, but there was a homeless woman who came in, and she was either in for a cup of tea or painkillers. And she read my story on the counter, put her hands in her pockets, and put some coins on the table and said, 'I want to be part of the campaign.'" Oh. Now, the pharmacist, she was like, "No, push back the coins," and said, "No, you keep your coins. I will put that in for you." But the woman said, "No, it needs to be my coins. I need to be part of this campaign." And I'm hearing this story and in tears, like someone I will never know. I don't know her name. I don't know what she looks like. And I don't know where she stays. And it just completely changed my perspective of someone who I would have perceived had nothing, gave everything, quite literally on that day for me. And yeah, so that love and affection, like there's story after story after story. And yeah, so, and even now when I'm walking the streets in my local neighborhood and someone recognizes me, will stop me and ask, "Are you the brother who had cancer? Are you the guy who had cancer? Are you Mo? And how are you? And what you're up to?" And so we're talking like 4 years ago when I began fundraising, and all this time later, people still care. And so, yeah, absolutely.
In my head, I'm thinking that's the second book, the stories of all the people that fundraised for you and why it had an effect on their life.
Yeah, I mean, I am toying with a working cover called "Humanity Said Yes," to then share the fundraising story, because book one wouldn't have given it justice. So I didn't even try to share the whole fundraising side of things.
I think it is human stories. I mean, part of what brought this podcast about was that I'd actually been through a very challenging time with my son. I mean, nothing compared to what you were, but he'd had glandular fever and been off school for sort of 8 months. And I sort of looked at my business and thought, well, I haven't been networking, and probably be very quiet. And one day I laughed out loud and realised that my own laugh startled me, and I realised that I just hadn't laughed in a long time. It'd been such a stressful period. And at that time, I tried really hard to have conversations with all my LinkedIn contacts. And I had just a day where randomly I spoke to 3 different people on 3 different continents, and the energy that we just got from each other, and bits of advice and bits of help, bits of learning. And I came off, at the end of those calls just sort of buzzing with an energy. And I just thought, this is brilliant. And actually, I recognise in myself that I'm lacking in this drive. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to have clients for a while. I'll start a sort of a challenge for myself, and it was 100 days, 100 conversations in 100 days, and I hashtagged it onto LinkedIn.
Wow!
So I set this challenge, and I thought what I would do is I would just speak to people like we are speaking now, but I'll just write a post. So I won't do a video or anything, and it was all based around challenge. And so I'd speak to people, and it just picked up. This amazing sort of connection with people, that I had people then contacting me saying, "I want to be in your 100. I want you to interview me." And the stories that came out and that people generously shared was just phenomenal. And I ended it actually at 56 purely because the feedback was so intense that it was taking me all day to answer all of the comments from every post. And some of those people are still, they're my sort of good friends. Some of them are contacts, and all of them had this amazing sense of challenge. But that story of humanity and humanity after humanity and community and everybody coming together, that really resonated. And actually that's what led to the podcast, was lots of people saying, we absolutely love that. Please build on that and do more of that. So I fully understand when you have that sense of people just engaging as humans, supporting each other, even when they don't know each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a fantastic story. I mean, I would love to read the stories of why those people got involved with that cause for you, and what it did to their life, what it gave them. That story of that homeless woman giving you all of her money. It's just absolutely incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And so, so at the moment you're sort of healthy. I mean, I know that you're under quarantine at the moment.
Yep.
But you're healthy and well, and kind of looking forward to life and the things that you're going to do in it.
Yeah. I have been shielding from before lockdown was announced, and it's taking stock now in terms of reflecting on the 5.5 years and how I now want to move into the next. It's difficult because living scan to scan, it's kind of like you're at the mercy of what the scans are going to show. But the last scan was 8 months, an 8-month gap, so they're getting longer. And so it's giving myself permission to actually say, yeah, I'm gonna live longer and not be limited to that kind of bubble of, we don't know what's going to happen after 3 months or 6 months, because that in itself is a bit of a limiting factor, not being able to take risk, like thinking ahead. So there are challenges all the time, and it's recognizing what those are and working through them.
I think it's an incredible story, and I'm absolutely looking forward to reading your book. And just sort of, before we end, but I just sort of wanted to touch on, you mentioned the George Floyd there, and I know that we were talking on the phone and having a conversation about the label, the Black Lives Matters, and why sort of was that inclusive, as a label itself. And I thought the way that you explained it was great. So I'd love you to go back and explain to our sort of listeners or watchers about that, if you would, and just to talk more about, because you talked very much about the passion that's kind of risen up in you again to go back and look into that, and how you're looking forward into including that now in your life and the way that you move forward.
Yeah, so I go back to Black Lives Matters, and it takes me back to work I was doing when I was at university, and it was part of a student union campaign. We had Black student campaign, Black History Month. We had Black student officer position. Now the NUS definition of Black student was anyone that's non-white, and so already in my mind, I'm part of the struggle. It's different, completely different. But when it comes to Black Lives Matter, I don't think enough people know the origin of how that moment came about, or this movement came about. And I don't know how many people have gone on and Googled Black Lives Matter to actually learn about the campaign. And when you do, you learn it came about in 2013 after a Black man, Trayvon Martin, I think is the name, I'll need to look up the notes, who was murdered by George Zimmerman, a white man, and he was acquitted, and the system allowed for a Black man to be killed. And so the campaign came about against police brutality against Black people who were disproportionately discriminated against. And so when you go back and read the history of the struggle and how it came about and the injustice in the system is designed to lock up Black people, like you look at the statistics, 40% of prisoners in the US are Black, where 97% haven't been to trial because they're too poor. Yet only 6.5% are the Black male population. And so the numbers don't make sense. And so when you look at the number and you look at the statistics, you get a feel for, you know, Black Lives Mattering. And the statement that comes to mind is, only when Black Lives Matter will everyone else's lives matter. And so when people go and do the research, I have no doubt you'll think differently, or they'll think differently about it. And in terms of my passion, I've experienced, you know, racism and discrimination and being stopped and searched and detained. And it's a humiliating experience. And in public, like, I remember Hendon Central Station, I was stopped, searched under a terrorism act, and it's horrible. And then
you were just walking through. You weren't. There was. I remember you were telling me the story. You were just walking through the station.
I was walking through the station. There were police out in force, checking everybody, or randomly stopping and searching people that particular day. And I was stopped. I asked questions. I asked what my rights were, and whatever they said I needed to do, I was like, you need to search my bag. Search my bag. And it was just exercising. I wasn't angry, like I wasn't resisting search. I wasn't saying no to them, but they thought I was being suspicious, and there it was. And so, you know, like,
asking for your rights, you were deemed to be suspicious. Just asking
yeah,
what you're doing and asking for your basic.
Exactly that. It was a case of, do you want a police receipt? And I was like, no, not really. You've stopped, you've searched, you've not found anything. And then it was like, why don't you? And I'm like, do I need a receipt? And they were like, no, you don't. And so because I asked and because I said no, I don't, they then end up detaining me. And at this point, they're like, I'm like, what does detained mean? And they were like, if you try to flee, you'll be arrested. And then I'm like, okay, I've heard about stories of people being shot, you know, and I'm like, I don't want that to happen to me. And at this stage, they know everything about me. They've found my staff ID card. I had 2 phones on me, and they were like, why do you have 2 phones? And I'm like, one is a work phone. And so you have these officers calling out IME number across the station. And then obviously when they do the search, there's nothing, like, there was nothing to find on me, and nothing I said was a lie, and the phone was registered with work and all of that kind of stuff. And so, but I don't experience that every single day. I mean, one time going into a concert, the audience queuing up were all mainly white, and I'm stopped as I'm about to go in and told you're randomly being stopped. And it's hearing the word random when nobody else was put aside other than me to go into a pop concert. It was, you know, like, I've experienced that, but nowhere near on the level that some of the experiences that Black people go through.
So how are you planning to kind of start to, I know, sort of putting almost the cancer not behind you, but almost alongside you, and to move forward in picking up the diversity and inclusion? What are your sort of plans there? Have you got any?
Yeah, so it's doing a lot of research and reading and, like, catching up on a number of things that have happened. So just this week or the past 2 weeks, learning, I was aware of it at the time. David Lammy had a review back in 2017, but I didn't follow up and do the reading about what those findings are. So going back and discovering those, going back over some of the books I'd previously bought and listened to. So Akala has got an amazing book called Natives. I bought that earlier this year, and just going over that, listening to podcasts. So a lot of it is about educating myself and being clued up on what's happened in the campaign. And then seeing how that ties up with my personal interests and my personal influence on a community level, and how I can do that. So kind of like have an open space at the moment, and seeing how I can support other campaigns, or how I can add to the conversation in a positive, constructive way.
And I think that's really lovely. One of the things I've noticed on social media is lots of people sort of rushing in. And certainly for me, I don't think I've said anything on social media because I found it so incredibly distressing just watching that video. I felt that I needed time to just to sit back and to work out, what do I want to do with this? How initially to kind of get over the upset, but then to be able to have a kind of clear mind again to go, okay, how can I help, and what do I need to do? And I think, it's important, as you say, sometimes to reach out to the organisations that are already in there and already know what's useful, and to say, how can I help? What can I actually do that's helpful, rather than me just kind of randomly picking something that actually might not be that useful. So I think, and I've spoken to a lot of other people actually who said, yes, I found it so distressing, I've almost been unable to speak about it. And I'm just kind of, breathing, and then I'm going to step in and actually contact people who are running the campaigns, say, how can I help? What's useful? So it's sort of exciting watch this space for you moving forwards.
Yeah, I think everyone has a role, because when you listen and you learn, you can then call it out, because racism and discrimination happens on a spectrum. There are the obvious versions of it, where someone is calling someone an abusive word, and you know it's racist, but then there are more subtle forms of it showing up. And so, in the home or in social settings, if someone says something, to actually call it out. At work or place of employment, to actually look at what's happening in the boardroom and who's employed in senior positions, and like it's a law to the legal side to collect monitoring data, but how much of that monitoring data is actually looked at and assessed and acted upon? And so I think there is a role for everyone in this. And yeah, I would hate for what happens next is to be forgotten in a few months, where saw a number of Blackout Tuesday social media posts, and it was kind of like a let off. I've posted this, and that's my contribution, right? I didn't, because it felt performative for me.
Yes.
And yeah, and so it's great that people want to be able to help and share, and it's going to take a few more steps to at least to get more.
Yeah, I wasn't actually aware of the Blackout Tuesday until actually late on the Tuesday evening. But yes, I feel the same. It's not enough to just post on social media. Actually, if you want to stand up and be counted, you have to stand up and be counted. And that's why, certainly for me, stepping back and seeing how I can do that really effectively, even if that's one person at a time, that's more important to me than blacking out my social media. But I think it's important, isn't it, for people to feel that need of belonging and to have something they can instantly do. For some people, that's really important. But we need to wrap up. So I could talk to you all day. But I have 3 key questions that I ask every guest. And so I'd really love to ask you those questions. And so they are: when you were going through your cancer challenge, was there a book, a film, or a piece of music that helped you, inspired you through it?
Yes, the book, it's called Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And that tied into my question, what does this mean? So that book I recommend to everyone. The film would be The Theory of Everything, Stephen Hawking story. Incredible, just gave me so much hope. And the song is Fight Song, Rachel Platten. I can't even remember her name, but that was my song. This is my fight song. There were a number of other songs, but that one comes to mind.
Very inspiring, absolutely. Yes, beautiful film, beautiful book. The song, I don't know if I know the song. I'll look at
Yeah, Google it.
look at and listen. And so my second key question to you is for people listening today, maybe going through challenges of their own, maybe going through similar challenges to you. What would be your key piece of advice to anybody going through a challenge right now? What would be your kind of takeaway today?
There'll be kind of two takeaways. One is the questions that you ask will drive your focus. So in my case, it was, what does this mean? Will I choose to stay? So ask yourself questions that are going to empower you. And secondly will be, you're not alone. That there's so much love out there. And people do want to help. People do care. And it's reaching out. Your immediate people may not, if that's your reality, but online, Twitter, Facebook groups, there are so many people that want to be there for you. So seek them out.
That's lovely. It reminds me of, I used to run workshops for people who are coming out of cancer treatment, and it was to help them kind of find their new normal, obviously a phrase we use now. And I remember one of the women there telling this story, and she said she'd had breast cancer, and she said there was a man who was about mid-70s, a neighbour, and she said, he obviously really wanted to help, but did not want to talk about breast cancer with her, and he would just come and mow her lawn. So he just showed up at the house one day and said, can I mow the grass for you? And she said, the cancer wasn't mentioned, but he just came, every week and just mowed the lawn. And actually, in the end, we devised a sort of almost a pro forma, which had, I'm at this stage of my cancer. If you'd like to help, these are the things that are useful. And we had it go through, I think it was just diagnosed, just going through treatment, and then just after treatment. So it had different things on. And they had it as something they could give to friends and families to say, if you want to help me, this is useful. It's just lovely that, like you say, community often want to come around you, and sometimes it can be hard to ask. So that's fascinating. And so my third key question is, if you were standing in front of the sort of world leaders of today, what would you say to them?
World leaders. I think today's world leaders is a bit of an oxymoron. So you look at America, Britain, Russia, China. They're the countries who have the UN security veto, right? But all of those leaders come from a place of self-interest and power. That's my perception of what I'm seeing. And then you have the tech leaders of the world, like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and Google and Amazon, and how an algorithm can polarize huge numbers of people. And so I don't think my message will be to those people in power, because a lot of it is money driven and self-interest driven. And my message will be to ordinary people to become leaders themselves, leaders in their own community, leaders in their own workplaces, to make changes and to find each other out and actually be the leaders that the world needs. That'll be my message.
Well, that's fantastic, because that's the entire premise of the Alternative Leader podcast, is
amazing.
Step up and be an alternative leader, whether it's in your family, in yourself, in your workplace, whatever it is. That's exactly what I'm trying to achieve.
Amazing.
So it's lovely that you say that. Thank you so much. We met a couple of years ago, or a year ago, we were saying a couple of years ago, and you had such a fascinating story then, and I'm so happy that you've agreed to come on and share it with us, and so happy at the diagnosis, because obviously when I spoke to you last year, this you hadn't had this all clear, so that's absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure and an honor to share. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.
Hi, I'm Mary Williams, as you know, and thank you so much for listening to the Alternative Leader podcast. I search for guests to bring you lessons and learnings that can help move you forward in your life, help you achieve the success that you want to, in whatever way that shows up for you, to help you lead powerfully, whether that's in your own life, as your parenting, your personal, or your professional, and make you the best that you can be. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and review it, and please share it with as many people as you think also want to move forward and gain success in their lives. If you want to find out more about me, go over to my website, which is www.mari-williams.com. That's www.mari, which is MARI-williams.com, and you'll find links to all of my social media profiles there. There's also a Facebook community that you can join, and again, all the links will be on the website too. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and thank you so much for listening.